Okay, we're going to lap in the valves now. So, we're going to see if we can do our exhaust valve first. That is the worst valve of the two, so I'm going to use the coarse grinding paste to start off with. Just once, a little bit, not too much of it, just some nice small amounts to start off with. The suction cup on there. If it will actually stick to it. This one is getting a bit old now. Right. Okay, we're starting to get there now. It's not looking too bad. So now we can move on to the fine side of the grinding paste. And that's going to finish off the valve seat then. Then after that you should be ready to refit the valves. Once you're done with the one valve, just repeat the same process on there. Just repeat that process with the inlet valve. Just repeat that again with the fine valve grinding paste. And once you're done, you should have two nicely fresh cut valve seats. Okay, after you've done grinding the valves in, because you've taken away some material whilst grinding them, you want to make sure that the valve stems aren't bottoming out on the lifters. You want a little bit of clearance there, and the proper Briggs specs can probably be found on the internet. I think it's something like 3 thou on the exhaust side, or no, 5 thou on the exhaust side I think, and 3 or something like that on the intake side. I'm not really sure. But all we're looking for is a small gap here, so just going to see if, making sure the valves are closed. So just put your lifters back in, and also put the cam in place just to stop them dropping down too far. And just see if you've got a gap after grinding the valves in. We do on the inlet side. We have a slightly bigger gap on the exhaust side, so those should be fine. It's important to check that gap, because if you don't have any clearance there, your valve will be slightly lifted up and you just won't have any compression at all, or you'll have very little compression. So it's important after grinding the valves in just to check that, to make sure that the stems aren't bottoming out on the lifters. But in this case I've been okay, we should be fine. Okay, so if we had just done that and one of our valves was bottoming out on the valve stem and wasn't fully seating, all we would do is clamp a small, well, just a fine file in the vise, just like this, and then you would take your valve and you would just be aiming to take a small amount of material off the bottom of the valve stem. Not too much. With each couple of passes, go and check it back in the engine with your feeler gauges until you've got it at the exact amount of thou in between the bottom of the stem and the lifter that Briggs and Stratton say in their specs for the engine on the valve clearance. So once you've ground the stem off to a point where you've got a nice valve clearance, then you can go ahead and put the valves back inside the engine. In this case we don't have to do any filing to the valves, so we're doing alright. We should be okay. Okay, we're ready to put our valves back in now. We've got the heavier spring for the exhaust valve, so we're going to go ahead and put that in there. I've taken the cam and the lifters back out just because it makes it a tiny little bit easier. So now, when we removed the valves, we had this small tab here downwards, so we could push this down so the valve would pop off, but now we want it facing upwards, so it makes our life a little bit easier to pop it back into place. Just push that down now. Take our exhaust valve. We have oiled the valve guides. Now you just want to work that spring down so our valve is allowed to slot through. And this is one fiddly job. This is not a nice job to do at all. Let's take our screwdriver, see if we can. Right, okay. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay. I just want to ease that back up a little bit. Okay, now we should be able to use our screwdriver. Like I said, this is one fiddly job. It's not an easy job to do at all without a valve spring compressor. Okay, we're now under the valve. Lifter. Probably not going to hear a great deal from me whilst I'm doing this, because it really just isn't an easy job. Come on. Okay, it's in. Oh, and that was as hard as it looks. That is one of the most horrible jobs to do on the Briggs and Stratton without a valve spring lifter. It really isn't easy. But yep, that's going to snap that valve back into place really nicely. Right, that's one in. Now we've got to do the inlet side. Okay, well, it's been a long time since we've done any work to the 3 horsepower Briggs and Stratton 1973 engine, and that's mainly been because we've been waiting for parts. I ordered some piston rings here in the UK, and unfortunately got sent the wrong ones first time around. I ordered the correct rings, but later style 3 horsepower, 3.5 horsepower piston rings were sent, which have a smaller piston rings than the older style. The older style have much thicker oil rings and compression rings. So I had to wait for the proper ones to be sent off, which I have now received, so we can fit those as well today. And we also got a brand new oil seal for the engine. The old one was worn through in one spot and was leaking quite badly, so we bought a new one. This had to come from America. I couldn't find the correct old style one in the UK, so we ordered this from America, but this came to a bit less than one I did actually find in the UK. So I decided to buy that and thought, well, I don't desperately need the engine running right now, so I can afford to wait a little while for this one to come in the post. But it came pretty quickly, and I've had this for probably about 2 weeks now. I just haven't got around to fitting it because I've been working on something else, which hopefully if some of the parts that I need for that come today, we can probably make a video of this weekend. We shall see. But we're going to fit this oil seal now, and we're just using a nut going through the bearing, and yeah, so we're just going to use a big flat penny washer and a bolt, just to make sure this goes down nice and evenly. There's no set amount for how far down this has to go. There is actually, because this is a vertical shaft engine, there's no oil return into the sump at the bottom of the bearing, because obviously if you had that, oil would just continue to flow in there all the time, because the sump oil lays right at the bottom, and oil would just, this oil seal just wouldn't be up to the job. So oil has to go into the bearing and then back up the bearing on the other side. By the looks of it, is how they've done it, so oil is controlled in the bearing. But yeah, so this one can actually bottom out all the way to the bottom without it restricting oil returning to the sump. So we can safely use this without having to check anything until it bottoms out. So all we're going to do is put the oil seal in like that, then position the large washer on top. This has actually got a metal casing all the way around, so we can do this easily without distorting the rubber at all. I'm going to put a small washer as well, and then our nut on top. But before I start doing that, I'm just going to give a tiny little bit of oil around this metal surface here, which should hopefully make it just go in a little tiny bit easier. We're not going to put much, just a wee little tiny bit around the edge. Just applying it on there with a small little brush. And that should just help it slip in a tiny little bit easier. So let's just put that over there now. Try and start to get it going in without getting out rubber gloves. I'm starting to wear these because I'm getting horrible rashes on my hands, which could be a result of fuel and oil and stuff from these old engines. So I'm starting to use these rubber gloves to see if it stops me being irritated as much. Right, well, we're going to start doing this now. Okay, well, the bolt method wasn't really working too well. It wasn't going in as evenly as I'd hoped. So all I've done now is gotten a sized socket that fits nicely, and then just tapped it down, which seems to have got it in there nice and evenly, which isn't too bad at all. I think that should be okay now. We shouldn't really get any leaks out of there. And before fitting it, I did test to make sure that actually fits the crankshaft nicely, that seal, which it does. So we shouldn't get any leaks out of there. And that's one part renewed on this old Toro now. So that's not too bad. I think that cost me about £5 in total, I think. Not too bad at all. And we shouldn't get any leaks now, that's for sure. And that definitely won't be just coming out of there easily. That's a nice tight fit. Yeah, pretty pleased with that. Yeah. Not bad. As you can see, the crankshaft fits in there nicely. And the rubber seal is definitely doing its job. We shouldn't get any oil leaks there now. We should be fine.